If there is a moment in Danganronpa that we could pinpoint as being the most important, completely unskippable one, it would definitely be the school trials at the end of each chapter. It's where some of the most important events and the climax of every arc take place within the game. Today we're going to take a deep dive into these and how they were localized from Japanese into English. Hello everyone and welcome. This is Localization Addict, I'm Hagane, and today we're continuing the Let's Talk Localization series, where I analyze a specific game's English localization in depth. This time we're taking a look at the school trials or Gakkyu Saiban. So, without further ado, let's get started.
So then what the hell's going on?
We're his prisoners, plain and simple. Nothing good can come of us defying him on impulse.
First of all, let's take a look at the words Makoto says before every trial starts. In English, he says, a deadly judgment, a deadly deception, a deadly betrayal, a deadly riddle, a deadly defense, a deadly faith, a deadly class trial. In Japanese, it says, 命がけの裁判 命がけの騙し合い、命がけの裏切り、命がけの謎解き、命がけの言い訳、命がけの信頼、命がけの学級裁判。In the original, we can see that the word used isn't exactly deadly, but rather putting one's life at stake. It's a construction made up of the words inochi or life and kakeru, a word with many meanings, but here it's used with the meaning of to put something at stake. This might look like it's the same, but there is another adjective in Japanese which literally means deadly, chimeiteki. It's a subtle difference, but it's there. Here we can see the principle of dynamic equivalence at play. Since the original is using one short adjective and one noun each time, the English localization tried to replicate the same structure. A judgment where we're putting our lives at stake, etc. is way too long and quite honestly rather awkward as far as phrasing goes. A life or death judgment, etc. is better, but it still doesn't quite follow the structure of one adjective and one noun. This is where we ask ourselves, what is the word closest in meaning to life or death that is an adjective and is also short? Well, deadly fulfills this role adequately. It is deadly if you're putting your life at stake, don't you think? This is proof that understanding and properly translating the structure of a given text is just as important as being accurate, which is why in translation courses you have to learn about the different literary devices that authors use, among other things. Another thing that catches my attention when comparing both versions is the words that appear right before the class trial starts and after you press the Finish Preparations button. In Japanese, it says Gakkyu Saiban Kaite. This means school trial, trial started. In the English localization, this was translated as trial all rise. Why was this localized as trial instead of school trial, especially considering that in previous instances where the word Gakkyu Saiban was present, it was always translated as school trial? Well, this was probably due to character limit. The word Gakkyu Saiban is only 4 characters long, whereas school trial is 11 characters long. And besides, we already understand that it's a school trial since it's been stated before. Do we really need to repeat it when we're struggling with a strict character limit? I think reducing school trial to just trial was a good solution to this problem. After that, we have quite an interesting word to translate, kaite. Here we see, like we saw in part 1, another instance of a standalone noun being used as a phrase in Japanese that needs to be changed in English in order to make sense. Kaite is the word that Japanese uses for when a trial starts. We can see this in games like Gyakuten Saiban, known as Ace Attorney in English, when the judge says,
それではとりあえず開廷します。
それではとりあえず開廷します。If you've ever seen a trial take place in movies, TV shows, or even English translations of games that take place during a trial, you will know that, generally speaking, in spoken trials, especially in the US, the judge begins by saying all rise. This is an example of a set phrase that should not be translated literally. It is important to research what is said in actual trials in English before localizing terms like this one. Let's move on to Monokuma's explanation of the school trials. In Japanese, he says,
まずは学級裁判の簡単な説明から始めましょう。学級裁判の結果はお前らの投票により決定されます。
まずは学級裁判の簡単な説明から始めましょう。学級裁判の結果はお前らの投票により決定されます。This translated literally would sound like this. First, let's start with a simple explanation of the school trial. The results of the school trial will be determined by you guys' votes. This doesn't sound very good now, does it? Let's see what the English localization did instead.
Let's begin with a basic explanation of the class trial. So, your votes will determine the results.
Now that looks way better. Let's analyze what happened here. The first part was omitted, probably because of a combination of it being unnecessary and struggling with the character limit problem. Simple was changed to basic, which is a valid choice. If we try searching for the keyword simple explanation of in Google, we get approximately 1 billion results, whereas searching for basic explanation of will give 600 million. It's not a great difference, and I think both fit the context adequately. However, basic is the shorter word, even if only by one character. This might have influenced this choice. We can also see that the passive voice present in the Japanese original was changed into the active voice in English. This happens because the use of the passive voice in English is less common than in Japanese, so they changed it in order to make the text flow better. Your votes will determine the results is far clearer and more readable than the results will be determined by your votes. But is this really the only factor to take into account? Spoiler alert, it isn't. This change is interesting because in English, the passive voice is used to take responsibility away from the doer of the action. Like for example, he broke into my house versus my house was broken into by him. As you can see, the second sentence is far less accusational and more indirect, whereas in the first one there is a clear target to blame. However, in Japanese, the passive voice doesn't have this effect. Rather, it's often used when describing an action that is made by more than one person. It's because of this that translating the passive voice in a literal way would have meant a pretty big alteration of meaning, and it's proof that translating literally doesn't always equal proximity to the original. In fact, in most cases, it does the opposite of that. Another interesting thing that I wanted to mention about the way Monokuma speaks in the school trials is the word used to talk about the culprits. In Japanese, he calls them kuro. This literally means black, but it's actually a word the police use to tell suspects apart from non-suspects. As you can see, this presents a big challenge in regards to localization since there isn't an equivalent word in English. Ultimately, this was translated sometimes as whodunnit and sometimes as blackened, more literally. What exactly is a whodunit, though? Besides what we can infer just from looking at the word, Google Sensei gives the following definition: a story or play about a murder in which the identity of the murderer is not revealed until the end. This is an almost perfect describer of the kind of story that Danganronpa is about. Whether this was intentional or not is beyond me, however, it is a nice detail to take into account. Moving on, I wanted to touch on the pun made by Hifumi when Monokuma is explaining why there are pictures in the place where their dead classmates would have sat. In Japanese, it goes like this.
死んだからって仲間外れにするのはかわいそうでしょ。友情は生死を飛び越えるんだよ。生死が飛び越える。
死んだからって仲間外れにするのはかわいそうでしょ。友情は生死を飛び越えるんだよ。生死が飛び越える。Translated literally, Monokuma says, "It would be a pity if you got separated from them just because they died. Friendship surpasses life and death." And Hifumi says, "Sperm surpasses." Okay, hate to be that person, but I'm going to go on and explain the joke. The pun here is that seishi, which means life and death, and seishi, which means sperm, are pronounced the same. These kinds of jokes are pretty tough to translate because there is no direct equivalent in English. It's in these cases where translators have to get creative and invent their own pun. The localization team did a masterful job at transcreating this into English by changing this seiji dichotomy and creating their own pun, but with the word penetrate. This is what it sounds like.
I'd feel awful if they got left out just because they died. Friendship penetrates even death's barrier.
Friendship penetrates?
I really can't stress how much I love the work done on this. It shows that there was passion behind the writing and that creativity was a priority. I do wonder how long it took them to think this up. I would love to ask the translation team that worked on this game. Okay, back to the analysis. After we get past the instructions, we get the phrase "make your argument" before the school trial finally starts. In Japanese, it says "giron kaishi," which literally means argument start. We have yet another case of a noun being used as a standalone phrase. But why was this translated as "make your argument" if the original says "argument start"? Well, I would argue that this is because they wanted to make it sound punchier. Argument start doesn't really mean anything in English, and "make your argument" makes it clear that you're expected to start your arguments. Additionally, this might show a difference in the culture of English games versus Japanese ones. In Japanese, a game will rarely if ever command you to do something directly, whereas in English, this is the norm. It's really interesting how the two cultures differ from each other, even in small details like this one. Then we get to the first line in the trial, said by Kiyotaka Ishimaru.
I assert that the one who was murdered was Miss Sayaka Maizono!
In Japanese, he says,
断言しよう。殺されたのは舞園さやかだ。
断言しよう。殺されたのは舞園さやかだ. This means, let's assert this. The one who was murdered is Sayaka Maizono. Here, I find two things that are interesting. First, the change from the volitional form, or let's do something, of the first person plural to the first person singular. There are actually 4 ways to interpret the volitional form of the first person plural in Japanese: as an invitation to do something, as a way to agree with another person, as a way to suggest that the speaker and the listener do something, and as a way to express the will of the speaker to do something. Like for example, in Hayaku neyo, which would be translated literally as "let's sleep early," but is used to express that the speaker is manifesting their will to go to sleep early. This means that you can interpret it as being an action being performed by the speaker and others, or you can interpret it as an action being performed only by the speaker. Like how in English, you can say something like, "let's cut the cake," but only one person will be cutting the cake, even though there is an us there. The translators most likely interpreted this shio as it being an action performed only by the speaker, and so to make it more clear, they changed it to the first person singular in English. The second thing that I found interesting was how he says Miss Sayaka Maizono, while in the original, he doesn't use any honorifics to refer to her. One would think that this miss was a way to show politeness in the text, but this is not the case, as in the original he does not speak using polite language. You might be thinking, why add the miss then? Isn't it kinda pointless? And to that, I will say that the reason that comes to mind as to why this change happened is because of his personality. He's the ultimate moral compass. This means that he talks in a demanding way, like a figure of authority, and also uses stiff, but not polite sentences in Japanese. So rather than interpreting this miss as a signature of politeness, I think what is happening here is that miss adds a certain degree of stiffness to his speech. He doesn't talk the same way your average high school student would, because he isn't one. I think this will be all for today. Stay tuned for part 5. If you like this video and would like me to make more videos like this, hit that like button and subscribe. I also have a Twitter account and TikTok, so go follow me there too. See you next time!